If you take a look at the video clip that's in front of you, this is from when I did that demo on basically how to shoot a scene, a couple weeks ago. You'll notice that the image is actually a little underexposed. We can't see our main actor's face. Can't really see his expressions or anything like that. I think this happened mostly because of the large amounts of white that was behind him. What's pretty typical for a camera to do is it's going to try and average out a scene. And so it read all that white behind him and it closed down the aperture a little bit to underexpose the scene a little bit more. And so what we do is we lose detail in the face. Also doesn't help that he had a hat on, which shadows his face even more. So when you're talking about a situation like this, in this room where I shot this, and you've got all this top light, having your actors having hats on might not be a great idea, if that makes any sense, okay? So it's just, I wasn't going to worry about it. I was just trying to demonstrate other things. But what this brings up is a good point that sometimes you're going to need to adjust your clips. And in this case, not only am I going to show you how do we adjust the brightnesses, but we're also going to adjust the colors a little bit. We're going to talk a tiny bit about that. If you go to your Effects tab, so let's just go here, and you can see your Effects tablet here, okay? Your video transitions might be open, so just close all those. And then what you'll see is you'll see the video filters. You're going to want to open those, and then you're going to see a folder here that says Color Correction. This is the one we're going to use most of the time. Now let me just say this about our color correction. Inside this folder, thank you. Inside this folder we have a whole bunch of them. I mean, there's just tons of stuff in here. We're going to use this Color Corrector 3-way. This is definitely the best one in my opinion. It's a little bit more complicated than some of the others, but it gives you more options. It gives you the ability to do more with your clip. So what I'm going to do, and it's actually pretty simple, all you have to do is take that Color Corrector 3-way and drag it down to the clip that you want to use it on. Now, what may or may not happen is you may see up here in the viewer, it says Color Corrector 3-way now for this clip. Now, if I hadn't just double-clicked on this clip, it wouldn't have happened. In order to edit the color corrector, you need to double-click on the clip that has the color corrector on it, that you want to change, and then you're going to go up here and you're going to click on the Color Corrector 3-way. Now this is where a little bit of being smart helps us. As I adjust the Color Corrector 3-way, okay, you're going to notice that there are going to be major changes in the color. Okay, you can do some pretty wild stuff. However, if my playhead is over on this clip here and I'm adjusting, I'm not seeing what's happening because my playhead is on a different clip in the timeline. So one of the first things that you want to do is you always want to make sure that your playhead is over the clip that you're supposed to be adjusting. That's number one. Number two is make sure that the clip that you want to adjust, before you adjust it, you double click it to get it into the viewer. Now theoretically you can tear this tab away and then click video here, and now I can adjust it and I'll see it in both windows, or if my playhead is on a different clip, I'll still see it in the viewfinder. But this gets a little annoying. I like to have the color corrector right in here, and I like to just put the playhead on the clip that I'm looking at, and now I can see exactly what's happening. Okay? So this is good so far, okay? Now, obviously, this is an extreme color shift. This is probably not what we want to do. So, the first thing that I'm going to do when I look at this clip, okay, is I'm going to look at just brightness and contrast and details. Before I do any color stuff, I'm just going to look at the exposure of the clip. And as I already said, it's a little underexposed. We can't see our main actor's facial expressions. This is for multiple reasons, including the fact that the camera underexposed a little bit. Also probably because he's wearing a hat that shields his face from our light source. And since our light sources in that room are all coming from up top, probably not the best thing to have. Now we can adjust it to a certain level. Of course, your ability to fix things is limited, because as you lighten things up, you'll notice it starts to get a little grainy. So don't just assume because it's super dark you can perform miracles either. But what I can do is I can look, and you'll notice that my color corrector has 3 of these, and it's blacks, midtones, and highlights, or whites. So I can adjust my highlights, my midtones, and my shadows individually. This is really key. So what I probably want to do here, my highlights are all pretty bright. I've got good white highlights, so I probably don't want to adjust those too much. It's my midtones, okay, that are a little bit on the low side here. So if I just take this slider and just slowly move it up, you'll notice that now we can see the facial expression of our main actor much easier. Notice that it's blasted some of the whites out in the background a little bit, so if I really wanted to, I could probably bring some of those down a little bit again to try and get them back to where they were, and now we have a pretty good clip. To just check where we were versus where we are now, there's a little eyeball up at the top here. You can just check that on and off and take a look at the difference that I've made. That's relatively dramatic. It's a much better exposed shot after a little bit of work. I can also lift up my blacks a tiny bit just to touch those shadows up a little bit. I would highly recommend that you don't do too much. The other slider down here, well, and let me say why. You don't want to do too much with your shadows or your highlights, because what you want to do for a properly exposed clip is you always want to have a pure black somewhere in the frame. Because if you don't have pure black somewhere in the frame, it ends up looking washed out. It'll look dreamlike. It'll look, you know what I mean? It just looks kind of flat and gray, almost like we're looking at things through mist or fog. Now, if that's what you're going for, then fine. But usually you want to keep your shadows pretty darn close to where they were, because much higher than that, and you will start to lose these pure blacks that are in the shadow areas of, and the detail and in the hair. That's what's really important. Consequently, you also don't want to go all the way down. If you bring your shadows down, they're going to start blocking up and you're going to start losing detail. Now this can be handy if you want to go like a super high contrast look. Okay, you can really do some interesting stuff. But generally speaking, not quite the best thing in the world, right? Okay, so let's undo that, undo, undo, undo. See if I can get back to where I was. Okay, there we go. So this is a pretty good looking clip. It's a little flat, and mostly that's because my highlights, I took my highlights down too much and they're too gray. So I'm going to lift them back up a little bit, let them get a little brighter so that we have some highlight, normal highlight. Maybe bring my mids down just a touch. You guys are looking at the projector. My monitor is showing me probably a more accurate picture of what this is going to look like. So it looks a little dark to you guys on the projector, but that's actually pretty good on the monitor here in front of me. So that's a good start. This fourth slider that's down here says SAT. That's short for saturation. What does saturation mean? Everybody, what are we talking about when we talk about saturation? Yeah.
Like sort of like the amount of that color in that one area.
Yeah. It's like the amount of color in that area. So, you know, you can have yellow or you can have yellow, right? I mean, you can have real yellow or you can have a pale yellow. And that's really what this does, is this adjusts the amount of saturation in the clip. If I push this to the right, you can see how everything goes super saturated. Watch the red in the brim of his hat just go really bright. See that? That was normal. Now it gets really saturated. Also notice that if you lift your midtones up and you lighten your midtones, you will naturally desaturate a lot of your colors, because what you're doing is you're pushing them closer to white. So in order to get the skin lighter here so that we could see his eyes, I lightened the midtones and I lost some of my reds. And so I can get those back by increasing the saturation a little bit. You don't want to go too far because things look pretty ugly if you go too far with the saturation. And you can see some of the splotchiness in the background, the colors, and there's like yellow splotches and stuff happening in the background there that we really don't want. If you go the opposite way, you can take an image and you can create a black and white, which is rather nice. Somewhere in the middle makes it look like 1930s, 1940s color, where the colors were really kind of faded, maybe not really true. You can add a color shift, which we're going to show you how to do that in a second. You can do all sorts of things that way, okay? So I'd probably bump the colors up just a touch here so we'd regain our nice red brim on the hat. We get some more of the colors in the background back, that sort of a thing, and we're good to go. Now the next thing that I would probably do here, or we could talk about, is the background looks a little greenish. Now the walls are yellow and we have fluorescent lighting in this room, and fluorescent lighting is primarily green. It gives off primarily green light. That's why it's never really good to photograph a person in color with fluorescent lights. They will always look a little sickly, especially if you have somebody with a pale complexion, fair skin, blonde hair, that sort of a thing, and you put them under fluorescent lights, they'll look really green-ish. So you always want to be careful about that. I could try to get rid of a little bit of the green in the background. Since my background is mostly highlights here, we could try to push the opposite of green into the background. So if I look at my color wheel on my whites area here, my whites right now may have a tinge of green to them. So do my midtones. I can push the opposite on that color wheel to try and get rid of the green. So I'm just going to drag the magenta up and over just a tiny bit here. And I don't want to go too far. See, if I go too far, you can see things start going kind of weirdish pink. Usually with something like this, it's better to just do very subtle, minute little changes. If you ever go too far and you want to get it right back in the center, you can just hit this little circle here, reset, boom. And now I can go back and just add a touch of that magenta in there, just a touch. And then I can try and do the same thing in the midtones. And see, if I do that, I'm noticing that things like his sweatshirt are starting to turn rather pinkish. So I want to be very careful about how much I do this because it's not working out too well. That looks pretty darn good. I don't think we're going to get too much better. Now, let's say we've got this perfect and we like it exactly the way it is. I might fool with it a little bit more, but let's just say for the sake of time, we've got a good setup. Now, if I go to my next clip in the timeline, you can see that this one also is a little bit too dark. And it's the same subject, it's also the same room, it's basically the same time. So I can probably use this color corrector as a jumping point or starting point for this clip. So in order to do that, it's actually pretty easy. You go up here to the viewer, you click on the Filters tab. You'll see the color corrector right here. All you have to do is drag the color corrector down to the next clip, and voila, it works. Now, be very careful. I want you to see, I'm going to make a mistake on purpose here. So let's say this is too bright. I mean, look at this, it's a little too bright. And I would like to maybe lighten the midtones up a little bit more on this clip than in the other clip because it's a little darker. So I'm going to use this as a starting point. If I just go to the color corrector and I start making changes, and I'm going to do a really extreme change, I'm just going to blast this to red. Why isn't it changing? What's that? Okay, so I haven't selected the clip. So what am I changing then? The first one. See? Oops. So this is a really important thing. If you are going to drag like that, the color corrector from one clip to the next, you cannot forget that in order to start altering this clip, I have to either double click it or drag it into the viewer. Now you'll notice that as I change it, it changes this clip. You see? So that's a very common mistake that people will make, is they will start to make changes in the viewer here they don't notice that it's not changing, or they don't care, or I'm not sure what, but they will do like 1,000 things to this clip, and in reality they're maneuvering all the colors on this clip, not this one. Oops. Okay, so you got to be really careful about that. Make sure you double click so that you are altering this clip and this clip only. So now I might go in here and you know, lift up the mids just a touch, and maybe it's really yellow in the background here, so maybe instead of going magenta, I might go a little bit more bluish violet in the highlights to counteract maybe that little yellowish tinge that we've got going on there. I might try that a little bit more with the mids as well, and maybe the saturation can go down a touch. Nah, it probably needs to even go up a touch for this one. And now the most important thing is to compare how the color correction works from clip to clip, because this is really the key. You have to be able to say, okay, from this clip to this clip, do they look like they were taken at the same time? Do the colors mesh? That's really the most important part now, because once you've started fiddling with the clips, you might even make it too red or too blue. That we can say isn't such a big deal. But if this clip and this clip are vastly different in their colors, then it's going to look weird. And the reason for that is because they are in the same place at the same time. These two shots are supposed to be identical. And so you do not want the colors and the grading to be that much different between the two shots, or else it will look incongruous. It'll look weird. It'll look like they are two different times or two different places. Does that make sense to everybody? You know, you got to have them be the same. Now, let me show you something else about these clips. One of the other really cool things about these clips is that they are stackable, for lack of a better word. In other words, let's go back to this clip. You can put multiple color correction filters on top of each other, and they will start to do different things. So for instance, let's say I wanted to take this clip and I wanted to make it look sepia toned, like, you know, old-fashioned. In order to do that, what I need to do first is I need to take the color out of the clip. This is also very helpful, by the way, if you want to make a daytime clip look like nighttime. I'll do that in a second. So the first thing I need to do is I need to take the saturation all the way down. Just get rid of all the colors. Oops, what did I just do? Wrong clip, thank you very much. Yep. So double click. Now I take the saturation down on this clip. You can see it's gone grayscale. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab the Color Corrector 3-way from the effects list a second time and drag a new one in. And now you'll notice that up here I have Color Corrector 2-way-2. So now this one I can now start throwing kind of like that orangish tone on top of it to kind of give things that old-fashioned look. Okay, that's kind of cool. All right, let's say I wanted to make things look like they were nighttime. This gets a little trickier. So let me just zap these back into place. What I will do is I'm actually going to add really deep blues. Now this is obvious too much, way too much right now. Okay. Take my highlights down a lot, okay, blues. Take my mids down a decent amount here, okay, and then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the saturation of the clip. So I'm going to take the blues out a little bit, so we just have a tinge of blue, because basically what I'm doing is by dragging this saturation slider down, I'm only saying the saturation of these blues. Then I'll go back to the other color corrector and I'm going to lift the saturation a little bit so that some of the colors start to come back in. See the hat here? Because at nighttime you don't see colors as well, but you still see some colors. That's actually a feature of your eyes between the cones and the rods. If you ever learn about that, it's really cool. The part of your retina that is responsible for seeing at night is only black and white. The part of your retina that is responsible for seeing in daytime is the part that has colors. in twilight or moonlight, you'll be able to use both at the same time a little bit, and so you'll see colors, but they'll be washed out. They'll be really deep and dark. There won't be a lot of saturation to them. So knowing that, I can now go in and I can start adjusting the saturation of these two color correctors to create what might look like a nice dark evening. Okay? Working with the blues in the shadow ranges and everything like that to create what could be a nice dark nighttime clip. In the old days, with film, they had to do this with, they would shoot what they called tungsten balanced film, which was always a little more orangey. They would shoot it in the daylight, which means it would go blue, and then they'd be underexposed by like 2 stops on the movie camera. A good example of this is a movie called Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone. You ever see that? They shot a lot of mountain sequences where they're running through the snow, and you can tell that it was graded like this. So it's kind of a cool effect, and you can again adjust the shadows and stuff and the midtones to make it look like it's nighttime, you know, and be very precise with what you want to do. I'll take questions in a second. Oh yeah, just sign me out a pass. So, you know, you can really kind of play around with this. It's up to you, you know, how you use them. But let me also say this. There's a lot to do with the psychology of colors and how it's used. A good example is, how many of you have seen the movie The Matrix? Only a few of you. Well, no, most of you. Good. So you might or might not remember this, but when Neo, our main character, is in the Matrix, everything is tinged rather greenish. There's a sickly feeling to it, that it's not completely right. Everything looks real, and yet everything was slightly green. Then, when he goes into the real world, when he's on the ship, the hovercraft thing, it's all very bluish. It's harsh, it's cold. This is a post-apocalyptic war, and it's not a nice place to be, and so you have this real cold, harsh environment, right? Lots of steel, lots of blues, and everybody's wearing grays and all that sort of stuff. Then, when he's in the computer program training with his kung fu and stuff, it's super warm. It's real nice oranges and reds. What they did with this is it alters your sense of emotion. While you're looking at the film, it just gives you a feeling. Something's not right here when it's green. And then when it's blue, it's harsh and it's cold and it's not a happy place. It's that real steel cold blue. It's not a warm blue, it's a cold blue. And then when they're in the construct, when they're learning how to fight and they're doing their trainings, it's a much warmer sense, and it's the place where you're happiest, and it's cool things are happening and he's learning all these new things. Do you see? So they're manipulating your emotions with the colors, so that you can use that as well. Every major movie, every movie that is done is color graded. That's what they call it, where they go through major processes to change and fine-tune the colors so that you get either a more natural feel, a more claustrophobic feel, you feel more anxious, or you feel more suspense, or whatever. They really pay attention to the lighting and the colors so that they can produce an emotion. Because after all, we're in the business of telling stories in this class. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And colors add to the emotion of your story. And the more powerful the emotions are in your story, then the more successful your story is. In fact, there's a lot of movies that have been very flawed from a technical standpoint, where the script wasn't perfect, or there were errors in the film where one person was over here and then all of a sudden the next shot they're over here. You know, there's all these issues with these films. One of the best was a movie called The Peacemaker with Nicole Kidman and George Clooney. And literally in one shot, she's wearing pants. Nicole Kidman's wearing pants. And they cut to a different camera angle, and now she's wearing a skirt. I'm not kidding you. And most people don't see that. Why not? Because it was a very successful film. It was a good movie. It was exciting. And the reason why is it wrapped you up emotionally in the story, and so those mistakes you didn't even notice because you're now emotionally involved in the story. That's a good movie. Whether there are mistakes or not, a good movie gets you emotionally involved. Part of that is color, contrast, all those things that we've talked about here. Does this make sense? So I want you using this in your films. I want you using this in your movies because it can really help you change the look of your movie. Just for instance, if you have, say, a character who's having a dream or a flashback, like a daydream, and he's thinking about the past, here's a perfect way to show us that it's a flashback. Less saturation, more saturation. Maybe it's slightly reddish or it's slightly greenish, and then the rest of the movie is normal colored. We're going to know that that section of your video is a flashback because it's not colored the same as the rest of your video. Does that make sense? So it's a very powerful tool. It's something that you really should be using in every video you do, is the power of these color adjustments. Okay? All right.